Okay, so here's what I do for the Artisan bread. To get it started, we just have to get the flour and everything put together so that we can have it rise before we bake it. So we're going to need bread flour. There's probably different kinds. I don't know, I just use this one. And you need 3 cups of it. So I just have a 1 cup measuring cup. And I have my large bowl. And I just kind of level it off. I'm not real precise with it. And you probably want to get it as close to 3 cups as you can, but I just kind of do the best I can. In it, so I'm gonna, my bag's almost empty here, so I'm just gonna put a little bit more in. Okay, so 3 cups of flour. Try not to make a mess. And then this is important. This is the, just make sure you can see that. This is the yeast that I use. It's the Quick Rise Instant Yeast, Red Star. I don't know if the brand matters, but this is just the one that I get that I know is the right kind of yeast. So, and we need 2 teaspoons of that. Just kind of sprinkle it in here. It's getting empty too. Running out of my ingredients. And then it calls for 1 1/4 teaspoons of table salt. I don't usually use table salt because I don't really have a lot of table salt at my house ever, so I just use my regular sea salt that I use. And the instructions say that if you're going to use cooking or kosher salt, then to use 2 teaspoons. I don't actually know if sea salt qualifies as cooking or kosher salt, but I don't really feel like it's table salt, so I usually do about 2 teaspoons of salt in here. And then the next part is the water, which isn't tricky, but it's like the only thing you really kind of have to pay a little bit closer attention to. So I'm just gonna, the recipe calls for 1 1/2 cups of very warm tap water, but have more on hand. So what I usually do is I've got my measuring cup, that's 2 cups. It probably maybe depends on where you live and your climate and stuff too. Like our climate here is really dry, so I think maybe that's partially why, but I almost always use 2 cups of water in mine because it's not the right amount to do less than that. So I'm just going to fill up my filtered water from my fridge with 2 cups. And then I'm going to put it in the microwave for like 2 minutes. And while that's warming up, one of the tricks that they show you in the other video from the person that made this recipe is to use the handle of a wooden spoon to mix. And it doesn't really matter for this part when it's dry, but once you put the water in and mix it up, you're going to want to, it's easier to use the handle of a spoon instead to get it all mixed up. But I prefer, I think it's best before you add the water to give your dry ingredients a good mix so that they're kind of somewhat evenly distributed when you pour the water in. I don't know if that matters or not, but that's just how I do it because it feels to me like it's a little more evenly distributed with all the ingredients in there. Just get it mixed up. And then while this is heating in the microwave, what was described to me was you want the water to be like bath water temperature, so like something that you might take a bath in. So not too cold, not too hot. If you get too hot of water, I think it kills the yeast. And so you don't want to have too hot of water, but if it's not warm enough, I don't think it works as well. So you kind of want to find that middle ground of the temperature of the water. And I've actually, I mean, everybody's microwaves are different and stuff too, so you might want to play around with the time. But usually, before I even pour it in here, when I take it out, I usually dip my finger in the water that I just heated just to kind of see, like, does that feel like something I might take a bath in? And that's kind of my gauge of whether the water's warm enough or too warm or not. It's been 2 minutes, 20 seconds, or that's not right. Just a little under 2 minutes. And to me, that feels about right. It's a little on the warm side, but I think it's okay. It's not hot. So then what I do when I'm doing this is, even though I almost always use the whole cup of water myself, just because I don't always trust, like, if the moisture in the air is different today or whatever, like, I don't know what all impacts that. So I usually just kind of pour it in slowly, and I'll do like a half of it first. And in your case, if you want to just start with the 1.5 cups, just because that's what the recipe calls for, to be on the safe side. If you end up getting too much water and it's too liquidy, you can always add more flour to it, but you don't want to like have to add a ton more flour, because I think that would screw up the ratio of how much yeast is in here and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know how good you can see this. So this is what the texture is like right now. And it's very dry. You can see, like, it's just super dry. So I know I need to add more water. So I'm going to go ahead and add more water. And then I'm going to keep kind of mixing it. Sorry, I don't have like a device to film this really good. So I'm just going to put this down for a minute. And I'm going to stir some more. And there have been a couple times for myself when I've made this that I've had to actually put in a little bit more water than the 2 cups. So I've had to reheat, you know, put more water in my measuring cup and then reheat it again, because it wasn't quite enough for where you want the texture to be. So here's where my texture is now. It's still pretty dry. So I definitely want to add more water. So I'm probably going to put the rest of the water that's in my cup, my measuring cup, in here. And then I'm going to mix it some more. And you just kind of want it to be, like, you don't want like dry clumps. Like, as you're mixing it, you want to make sure that there's no dry clumps. And maybe what I would compare it to is kind of like mushy oatmeal, I guess, as far as like the texture or the consistency should be in terms of how much water and how you know how much water is the right amount. You want it to be, it's going to be a little bit sticky. Like, let me... like, it's kind of sticky when you mix it. You can kind of see it's, you know, there's some kind of stickiness to it. So you want, that's fine. You want it, that's fine to have that. But just basically, sorry, I'm not good at this. Mix it up good so that there's no dry spots or dry clumps. And then once you feel like it's mixed in good and there's not any dry spots and you kind of have that sort of sticky consistency, you should be good. And then I just kind of try to wipe this off a little bit. Doesn't really matter, but anyway. And then what I do is, you can do this I think with plastic wrap or something too if you want, but I like to just take one of my plates because it fits really nicely in here. And then I just leave this like on the stove in my kitchen just sitting here. You're gonna wanna have it sit for 2 to 3 hours to rise. And again, I think probably, you know, climate and, you know, probably elevation and things like that come into play with rising, or how long it takes to rise. So you're going to kind of watch that for yourself, just to see. But for me here, I usually let it rise for about 2 hours, just sitting on the counter like this. And then I'll check it after 2 hours. Like I'll set a timer on my phone or something so I don't forget. And then I'll check it at 2 hours and see what the consistency is. And if it's risen and the consistency looks good, then I'll go ahead and finish the rest of the baking process. You can also, once it's done rising, if you're not ready to bake it right away, you can take this and put it in the fridge, because that will stop the rising process. And if you do that, it's fine. I prefer not to do that most of the time, because I feel like it just adds extra steps and more time overall. So normally if I'm going to make bread, I just do it when I know I'm going to be home and I'll be around, you know, for the next couple hours, so that I can just let it rise for 2 hours and then prepare it and heat up my oven and get the bread baking. So it's just kind of up to whatever you have available for your time. Like I can do this, I can start this, you know, because obviously I work from home too. So I can start this and just have it rise, set my alarm on my phone. And then in 2 hours, I can come back down to here for my desk and, you know, quickly finish up the process, get it in the Dutch oven and, you know, bake it while I'm finishing work for the day or whatever. And then we can have fresh bread at dinner and stuff like that. So anyway, it's pretty easy in that sense. But I'm just gonna let this wait for 2 hours, let it rise. And then I'll come back and check it, and I will take more video of what it looks like or what it should look like, and then show you the rest of my process. Okay, so I've had the dough rising, just sitting on my stovetop, just no heat or anything, room temperature, for about 2.5 hours. So what I'm going to do is take a peek here at the dough, and I will give you a peek here so you can see that it's pretty jiggly, kind of jello-ish. And you can kind of see on the sides here, there's some bubbles that have formed on the side. Sometimes you'll see bubbles along the top that have kind of popped, or, you know, are in a place where they are popping, like. But this is basically the consistency that you want, just kind of a jello-y, jiggly kind of a consistency. So I'm going to go ahead and preheat my oven to 450. And then while that's preheating, you actually want to take your Dutch oven with the lid on and go ahead and put it right in the oven. And let that get nice and hot while we're preparing the bread dough. Let's see, I'm gonna have to get creative here with my placement of things. So we've got our Dutch oven in the oven with the lid on, and it's preheating at 450 or to 450 degrees right now. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to get the dough ready to put into the Dutch oven once the oven's hot and the Dutch oven has been heated. So the first thing you want to do, you're going to want to make sure you have your parchment paper handy, but get out that bread flour again. And I don't have a whole lot left in here, but I'm going to try to use up what I can here. You want to have some kind of a surface, My preference is this just super basic cutting board, like flexible plastic cutting board thing. I'm sure other things would work in terms of a surface, even probably just your counter would work. But I personally like this, and I will show you my process of why I like this particular surface and why it works for me, for what I'm doing. Okay, so the first thing is you want to put some flour on your whatever surface you're working with, because we don't want the dough to stick. And then there's different tools you can use. Personally, I don't really have anything fancy, so I just have kind of a rubber scraper or rubber spatula that's kind of wider, sort of big, but not huge, I guess. And this is what I use because it works for me, and then I don't really want to buy something special, so I just have this on hand because I use it for other things, so it works. So what I just do is kind of like scrape down the dough off the sides. And then ultimately what we're going to do is we're going to take this and flip the dough onto this surface. So I'm just kind of like scraping it out of here and watching where it's, making sure it's going to land on my surface here. And one of the things about when it's rising, the instructions kind of say that after an hour of it rising, just give it an eyeball check to see if it's actually rising. And if it's not, you may have to, it needs to be in a warmer place to be rising. So I think you could possibly like have it rise. You could just put it inside the oven and not turn the oven on, but just have it like in an enclosed space that could be a little bit warmer. Or you could potentially, I don't know, maybe turn on like a super low level of heat in your oven and like set it in there for a little while to help it rise. I've never done that, so I don't really have advice on what to do or how to do that. There's probably more information with the recipe online, I would guess, that would go into detail about that. But I've just always set it on I just set it on the stovetop, and that seems to work okay for me. So I'm going to take a little bit more flour, and I'm going to put it on sprinkle it on the top here. Kind of help it from getting too sticky here. So then you want to take the dough and you kind of want to, this is kind of messy, it's messier than usual here, it seems like. You want to just kind of fold it in on itself, like scrape it off, scrape it up, fold it in on itself. Part of that is getting like the air bubbles and stuff out, because that yeast that's in there will create those air bubbles. And so we're kind of folding it on itself to just condense it and squash any of those air bubbles out. And then once you have it kind of folded on itself like that, this is the part that for me works really well using this particular surface. So you want to take some parchment paper, and you don't need a ton, but you want enough that it fits inside the Dutch oven with enough that you can easily grab it out by the edges or whatever too. So you do want it to be sort of enough working space, but not necessarily too big, because you'll have too much extra, which isn't the end of the world, but it's just nice to have it appropriately sized for the Dutch oven. So the next thing we're gonna do is transfer this dough to the parchment paper. And that's why I like using this particular working surface, because I can kind of just flip it. And of course I get flour all over myself in the process, but that works really well for me when I'm transferring it. I'm sure there's other ways of doing it, but that's just what I started doing it, and it's worked really well for me, so that's what I do. And then you can kind of just reshape it a little bit. So you kind of want it to be round. That's sort of the goal. It's pretty good. And then I'm just gonna have it set there until my oven is done preheating. And then we're gonna take the parchment paper by the corners and set it into the Dutch oven and then bake it. So as soon as my oven is done preheating, we will start that step. Okay, my oven is finally preheated to the temperature of 450. So I'm gonna have to move this, I think. And the one thing to remember when you are doing this is that the Dutch oven is going to be super hot coming out of the heated oven here. So you want to make sure you have your hot pads or your whatever, pot holders or whatever you use handy, so you don't forget to not just take it out of the oven when it's hot. And then take the lid off. And then we're going to take our dough and pick it up by the corners of the parchment paper, like so, and then just pick it up and set it into your oven. Again, put your protective things back on your hands, put the lid back on, open the oven, and very carefully, because this is heavy, put this back in the oven with the lid on, and we're going to set the timer for 30 minutes. And then we just wait. Okay, so my timer has gone off for the half-hour mark, and now what we want to do is carefully remove just the lid, and then set this back in the oven uncovered for another 12 minutes. And that'll be the last of our baking step. Okay, my 12-minute oven timer just went off, so I'm going to go ahead and take the bread out of the oven. And now what you can do is, the parchment paper is not hot, but you have to be really careful because obviously the Dutch oven is, so you can try to pick this up and just set it outside. This is super hot, so just be really careful. Just kind of out of the way there. And here's the bread. As you can see, it's got a nice kind of light brown crusty top on it after we took the lid off. And then you just want to let it cool for a little bit before you dive in and cut it. And so I set it on just a simple rack, metal wire rack, to cool it. And then once it's cool, I will show you how probably the recommended way to cut it is. Okay, after you've waited for a little while for it to cool, just take it off the rack. And what I like to do is use the same, I just cleaned off that, my surface that I was using before. And this is just like a grippy thing. It just helps when you're cutting it. So I like to put that underneath the cutting board. And you can take the bread off and just discard the parchment paper. And I do have a bread knife, like a serrated bread knife here. So to me, the best way to cut this is to cut it once down the center. And so you've got two halves. And depending on how quickly you'll think you'll go through the bread, just because it's just the two of us, I usually take that one half and I just put it in a container right away, and I'll put it in the refrigerator because it'll last longer if you don't cut it right away. Slice it. So with this other half that I am going to slice, that we're going to eat first, you just set it on the flat edge. I'm going to move my camera over here because I'm going to start cutting this other side. Okay, so basically you just cut however thick or thin slices you want. And this round style of bread, instead of like a traditional loaf that you might buy at the store, is called a boule or a boule. And you can look up, there's videos, or at least one that I came across, of how the best way to cut a boule loaf of bread is. And this was what was recommended. So after you've cut it all, you can just, there's different ways of storing bread, I'm sure, but I basically just take it and put it into a Tupperware or whatever kind of container works. And then this is still kind of warm, so I'm probably not going to put the airtight lid on it yet. I'm going to let it cool down some more, but that's how you cut it, or the best way to cut it, so that you're not squishing it, and it gives you a flat surface to cut. And then you have two halves, and so you can save the other half in the fridge and then take it out again when you're ready to start eating it, and then you can slice it that same way. So that's how you make the bread.